How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. It's Today was a little bit of a chaotic day. It was interesting last week. I think that I'm expecting another child. So last week we it felt like we had a lot of clarity from a work perspective around what the next kind of 3 months look like. And then I woke up to find out that our chief science officer and one of our lead chemists were still waiting to find out what happened, but blew up his leg somehow snowboarding yesterday. So waiting for imaging, but as a result, maybe out of the lab. Worst case scenario for 3 to 4 months. So all of this beautiful planning that we did last week is now just like thrown into chaos. And then at the same time, on Saturday, my wife had a false labor. So we do expect the baby is going to come anytime. So just kind of scrambling to try and get organized and feel comfortable to take at least a week off to support my wife. But I
My
was hoping
friend.
for a four.
Oh, my friend. I have this so much like I feel you. It's a lot. It's a lot happening. And how is she doing? How's
Uh,
the baby doing?
Baby is very healthy. Mom is very ready for baby to get out. Yeah. This is second time around, and so her body is going
Kind.
through changes faster, and I think that she's feeling fatigue and exhaustion and a lot of mental anxiety as well. Knowing that she needs to go through another birth experience is pretty terrifying for her because she had a we had a home birth last time, and
Wow.
there was no real complications, but it is a
Yeah.
very intense experience. And so I think that
You're
her
brave souls.
she's got anxiety naturally. So I think that having this idea or this knowledge of what she's about to be going through is overwhelming her right now.
Of course, of course. Will this be a home birth as well?
We have our preference in Calgary is to go to a birthing center
Hmm.
because they have a nitrous option. So if you're not working well with
Beautiful.
labor, you can breathe some nitrous, which can help with the pain. So first preference would be birthing center, and then second preference is uh, I don't know, it oscillates between home and hospital, but hospitals make my wife really uncomfortable. She generally doesn't feel kind of safe or supported by hospital.
Nobody does. I'm a doctor and I don't.
Yeah. So, but she knows that she could have access to an epidural if necessary. So, depending on the pain and everything, she's leaning that she might want to go to hospital, if not the birthing center. But I don't know. We're prepared for all three options.
Beautiful, beautiful. And flexibility is everything. Because when you're stuck in one particular plan in your head, come on, life just gives you something, and you're like, oh, what do I do? And then you see wives and husbands get into an argument at birth. You're like,
Yeah,
no, this is not the time to have this conversation. You should have this months ago so that you have clarity in flexibility. Because babies come the way they want to come, and you have to be prepared to change, and it's very psychedelic. Let me tell you, I had very psychedelic experiences with my both my children. I wish I'd known how to push, for example, at the end with my first one. I had no idea. And I wish I had known that if you control the head, I don't know if you know about this, because you're obviously experienced with the home birth. So, but you're controlling the head with the palm of your hand as the baby is coming through and you see them crown, what you want to do is not have an explosive birth. You want to have a very, very
slow.
slow, and you hold the head and you put pressure. You put pressure on the crown with the palm of your hand, gentle, firm pressure. So as the baby is coming through, you have the head and then
Yeah,
you're supporting the baby, of course, but it's not tearing the vaginal canal, because we all
interesting.
have that, and it's horrific to be able to get through that postpartum. That by itself, postpartum was like the worst time of my life, especially with the first one, because I didn't know and no one prepared me. And so it's important to know. And the vaginal tear was the worst one, and mine wasn't even that bad. But also knowing how to push. So when my first one was at a hospital with midwives, and they were wonderful. They were wonderful. But it was very paternalistic because I was in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
And, it was very conservative, it continues to be, but not as bad as it was like 15 years ago. So, yeah, I was in labor for 21 hours, pushed for 2.5 hours. At 2.5 hours, they come to me. They're like, if you don't push this baby out in the next 30 minutes, you're going to get a C-section. I was like, heck no. What are you talking about? No. And so I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to push with being numb with the epidural. And so the one thing that the midwives told me was if I take a sheet and they tied it around the bed, and then my at the time husband held the other end. And so as I was pushing down, then that was the push. And so I was like, oh, this is it. You should have told me from the beginning this is how I should push. And so I did that with my second baby, and it was like a 15-minute delivery. I was in labor for a while, fine. But a 15-minute controlled delivery. It wasn't like this, push the baby. And I felt like, oh my God, I'm in time pressure. So I have to push the baby out, and you're fine. Everything is fine. This is like happened for millennia, right? Thousands of years, millions of women have given birth. So this is a very natural, we know, our bodies know. We just have to surrender and listen
Yeah.
and engage at the right time. And so, but with my second baby, that pressure over the crown as he was coming through the birth canal was everything. And one of my friends who was a doctor and doula, birth doula, she told me about it. I was like, thank you, Michelle.
And I'll have to ask my wife if she's aware of that aspect of delivery, because that's the first that I've heard about it, but it makes intuitive sense. Like listening,
Yeah.
like hearing it, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And my friend who's done this work for a while now, she's done it with a lot of her family members and relatives and all of that, and it works. It works really well. So just little tidbits to help things along.
Yeah, the thing that we didn't know about was the hormonal swing a few days after birth, and that I can't remember what they called it, but like the blue, I don't know, blue Thursday or something. It was like the fourth day after delivery, and your hormones just like crash to something of like a below menopausal level. And so Ariel was just feeling so low and empty. And she called our midwives, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is totally normal. Like just give it a couple days and you'll rebound." And so, she didn't have any like postpartum depression or anything that was kind of long term or severe, but definitely that fourth day was a dark day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to know, right? Like even us talking about it for the listeners, they're going to take some things and that they didn't know. And it's so funny that, right, about these things, about any female stuff, we're all like, don't talk about it. And we're getting more open about it, which is great. But everybody shies away and you're like, this is how you were created. We
Yeah.
should be very loud about all of these things so that people who go through it, women who go through it, there's wisdom, there's support. They know they're not alone in feeling these things. For me, the first 3 weeks was horrible. So with my second one, my mother-in-law offered to come, and my husband was like, "Oh, maybe for 4 days." I'm like, "No, she's staying for 3 weeks. She's gonna live with us at least for 3 weeks." And she did, and it was amazing. It was amazing. I laid in bed, and they were so wonderful, like bringing me food and in a lot of cultures, in a lot of indigenous cultures, the first month of birth, the mother does minimal, and that's how it should be. So I borrowed that for my own thing and implemented it in my life. And it truly changed everything, everything. In fact, that's how I started writing my book. This one, I just published this one. The Conscious Physician Method, Conscious Life Practices, and Psilocybin. It was my second child that was born, and I was like on one because you don't sleep.
Well, yeah, something I've been very curious about is psilocybin for postpartum depression, just because I feel like it could do so much for that connection between mother and baby. And if something that's driving that the postpartum depression is that feeling of being disconnected from your newborn or your infant. I'm very curious if psilocybin, whether it's microdosing or macrodosing, could be something that could help bring that bonded feeling or that feeling of unity back between mother and child. Are you aware of anyone who's used psilocybin in that kind of
That's such a
part of
great
period?
question, and I need to look into it. I haven't seen any, though I do know that there are cultures who, in the third trimester of pregnancy, the mom has ceremony with their community, but it's in the third trimester and it's been shown to be fine. So, which, means to me, even if it does cross the blood breast barrier or milk barrier, it would be okay because that's what's been happening in a lot of cultures. And in fact, that's probably how they're connected even deeper with their community and with their mom and with the natural way of life. But have I seen any formal studies like a Western,
Yeah.
medical thing? I haven't but I haven't really looked deeply into it.
Probably be challenging to get through the ethics review board at this point
Right,
in the
right.
evolution.
Although you would be surprised if there's a mom who's not lactating or does not want to or cannot feed the child, like, breast milk, then that would make sense. And maybe, there are studies about that. Actually, at University of New Mexico, where I've been at for years, no longer with them right now, but they are doing a study with MDMA in moms with PTSD and addiction 6 months postpartum
Okay.
with MDMA and therapy and all of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if that is going to require the moms to pump breast milk and to avoid any breastfeeding for, I don't know what it's going to be, 12 to 24, 48 hours,
Yeah, maybe
limited
even
time.
shorter. Maybe even shorter. I
Yeah.
think the half-life of MDMA is like 6 to 8 hours, something like that. Or maybe shorter than that. I have to refresh my memory. But I went through ketamine treatment or ketamine certification when my baby was 4 months old. And I got IM, intramuscular ketamine. And so I pumped and dumped the next feed. So, for 6 hours, I didn't give him my breast milk based on the pharmacokinetics of the medicine. So then everything was fine, but similar to MDMA. It would probably be your next every 3 hours if you're gonna say every 3 hours I pump the next
Yeah.
one, or maybe if you want to be really safe, two next ones. So at 8, 9 hours after, it may be safe again. But again, look into it because I forget the pharmacokinetics again. Yeah. Cool. So tell us about you, Danny. Tell us about you, whatever you want to share. We're excited to hear about you and learn about you.
Yeah, so what to say? I suppose I'm an entrepreneur, chemist educated, and really at the root of it, a proponent of psychedelic medicines, which dates back to my own kind of teenagehood where I was suffering after my dad was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And it was really psilocybin and subsequent LSD experiences that I guess what I feel was responsible for breathing this kind of passion for living back into my soul. And for several years, for 2 years after his diagnosis, my life was quite dark and empty. And, it's interesting. There's even a lack of memory kind of between the ages of 13 and 15 for me. Lately, going to bed every night, my son, he always asks, like, hey, tell me stories from when you were a boy. And so I kind of ask, like, what age do you want to hear about? And between 13 and 15, there's like no real memories that I can recall other than some critical ones of like when my father had his first seizure, or like when he had subsequent seizures and went to the hospital. Like those traumatic memories are still very strong, but I can't remember other experiences in that time until psilocybin and then a subsequent LSD experience where, like I said, it was like this light kind of turned on or the spark kind of reinvigorated that fire for my soul. And I think that a sense of wonder and awe was breathed back into me. And so I basically just took that as this conviction that I felt like my life had been saved to try and improve access to psychedelic medicines for other people. Didn't know how I wanted to do that, but kind of discovered my passion for chemistry and over time decided that the role that I was going to play in, well, when psychedelic medicine started coming back into the mainstream was to be that of a manufacturer. I wanted to be kind of at the root of manufacturing these medicines that I'm hoping will be used for, healing and wellness purposes. Because my own experience is that they're really useful to help treat, these underlying causes of depression or PTSD. But my own practice with them has moved well beyond that and into wellness. And my hope is that we can actually start to apply psychedelics to healthy normals or to however you want to kind of box the average person to help build more resilient minds, more resilient humans so that we can help avoid major depressive disorders or major mental health traumas by building a more resilient human, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So you studied chemistry?
Yeah, I did study chemistry with a focus in synthetic organic chemistry, but really took all my options in university was just various different types of chemistry other than ceramics. But I mean, even ceramics, I think, has a little element of chemistry to it. And yeah, originally it was interesting. I was interested in explosives and fireworks, but then after several psychedelic experiences, my interest really flipped quite quickly from explosives to psychedelic
Just
medicine.
like, of course, of course. My dad has a PhD in chemistry from England. And yeah, so I grew up with that. And, we'd go to his lab at his work. He had a veterinary or veterinary medicine practice in Iran, and he would create the medications for large animals, for cattle and such. So yeah, chemistry is in my family, and I have so much reverence for it. Though I haven't, I was more interested in the biological sciences, and that's why the medical route. But we need all of it, obviously, and chemistry, all of it is in everything, right? Yeah. So I'm very curious about your curiosity about psychedelics, and then about manufacturing, and then how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so my interest in manufacturing and chemistry, it's interesting actually. Originally, I wanted to be a psychiatrist or a physician, but it just was not my strength. And I think it's really important that we learn who we are and that we play to our strengths. I had never been good at social studies or English or, language studies. And when I went into the sciences, chemistry came very naturally to me. Physics, the ideas and the concepts come naturally, but, like actually applying physics, I find quite challenging. But biology, my mind is like a sieve. I could not remember anything in kind of like biological concepts that would make an effective physician. So I essentially went from essentially a 4.0 GPA in chemistry, and I took a semester of biology to start going down the med route. And yeah, my GPA just like plummeted to the point where I like got kicked off the dean's list. I didn't graduate with distinctions anymore. So I kind of, read the writing on the
You
wall and
knew.
said, I'm going to
Yeah.
go down this pure chemistry path, and took inspiration from Albert Hofmann, discoverer of LSD and first person to manufacture psilocybin, the Alexander Shulgins of the world who, really just focused on discovering molecules and how that could interact with your neurons to basically change your experience. Yeah, and in terms of how I got here, when I graduated from university, there was no real opportunity in the psychedelic space, but the medical cannabis industry in Canada had just started to grow. And so I joined one of the kind of emerging cannabis companies. I was the 11th employee, and it was a very intentional decision. I felt that if there wasn't an opportunity for psychedelics at that time, I at least wanted to learn the controlled drugs and substances regulations and figure out how I could apply those learnings from the cannabis industry to a future in psychedelic medicines. And then in 2018, there was a conference in Stockholm where there was all this really exciting research being presented, and I had kind of fallen out of touch with the latest and greatest of where the psychedelic community was at. And so that conference really inspired me to start putting together a business plan to try and raise some money and build a manufacturing lab to start manufacturing psychedelics, initially for clinical trials, ultimately with the goal of trying to supply MAPS for their commercial market or some other emerging leader that had yet to be named then. And so I reached out to Rick Doblin, who's the founder of MAPS, and I asked him if he'd consult on a business plan for me. And he said, I'd be more than happy to, but the guy you need to meet is Peter Vanderheyden, who's working on basically the exact same thing in Canada. And so Rick put Peter and I in touch, and, our values were 100% aligned. Our business plans were basically identical. Peter is about 35 or 40 years older than I am. And he was looking for someone to basically pass on all of his experience and his knowledge
Wow.
to and to take the company into the future. So Peter, he was our CSO originally. He's transitioned that on to Giorgio Baggi, and he's now a director of the company. But yeah, it was a really serendipitous way to come together.
Wow, how incredible. And how long ago was this?
So I think that I reached out to Rick in 2018, and that's when Peter and I were introduced. And then 2019 is really when we started working together in earnest.
Beautiful. Wow. You went into the belly of the beast.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we've been chewed up and
Wow.
spit out, and we're still around trying to make it work.
I mean, let me tell you something. This realm is certainly not for the meek, or you can be. And then you're like, if I want to keep going, and if I believe in the vision of expanding our community and elevating consciousness of humanity, if that is what you're aiming for, then you can keep going. But if you are just looking to make a buck or do that kind of a thing, it's not for that. And those people I've seen some people come up and they're like, whoop, because there has to be heart, soul, everything in this work. And maybe that goes for all successful businesses, honestly, but at least this is what I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that, a lot of I think a lot of organizations in the psychedelic space have the same end goal in mind, and it's really just the values that point them in different directions along the path to get there. And that's one of the things that I, struggle with sometimes, or one of my fears is that there's a lot of noise that's been created and there's a lot of profit driven interests now within the psychedelic space, and my concern is that that focus on profit is going to dilute the message of the purpose that's behind it, and with that it's going to impact how these things actually roll out in the world and for patients. I'm concerned it might limit the impact that it's actually going to have, but it's all we can do is try and be part of this movement and try and shape it with the values that we believe in. And ultimately, it's kind of this, well, I don't want to say between good and evil because I don't really believe that anyone has evil intentions, but it's almost like it's a battle of virtues right now. And if you don't participate and you don't actively try and co-create the
Yeah.
future that we want to
Oh,
build, then you're kind of
yeah.
damned. You just kind of have to.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up because, there have been moments in my life in our world affairs and things that go on that I've been an expert in certain things and I've had fear of speaking up. I've had fear of having conversation around a particular topic. And then I see it go the very wrong direction. I'm like, oh, could I've had a humongous influence? Maybe not. But could I have had a role in shaping and that co-creation? Yeah, I could have. And so for me, I had to really do a ton of inner work. I do it every day. This is not something that I've done like 2 years ago, is that I do it every single day. And with that, facing fears and whys and where is it coming from, and what am I doing and for what purpose? You got to keep looking at that. You got to keep looking at that and letting go of the limitations that we create for ourselves and having conversation. It's people like us that need to have conversation. And so I really came out, and my first appearance, I think it was around the same time that I created the podcast. I had a mainstream media appearance on NBC and then 5 subsequent ones to that, to educate the population and community. You're using, but how are you using it? You got to have therapy or trauma therapy or coaching before, during, and after. It cannot be, there's got to be guidance, there's got to be community and support. You can't, this is fire. You can't just play with fire and not respect it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's interesting. Like with my own personal experiences, there was no mentor or leadership or guide when I was a teenager and I was starting to discover these things for myself. And I've seen harms created. I am fortunate that, my own internal guide or spirits or the mentors and influences from the other parts of my life were able to help shape and guide me into a direction that was positive and ultimately had positive outcomes. However, for my story, there's probably 3 or 4 who didn't manage to use all of the insights to create a more healthy life. And so that's something that I totally agree with and I'm very hopeful for, is that um, part of moving forward, you have very clear leadership and
Yeah.
mentors so that we can
Yeah.
roll this out in a very healthy and effective way. And it's interesting because there are companies who they're looking to research this more from an objective point of view to look at the effect of a drug not coupled to therapy. And it'll be interesting to see what those outcomes are going to be, because I think that
Mm-hmm.
it still will be very effective in many, many people, but I think it's about maximizing benefit. And that's what the therapeutic component is for. And the process that you need to build around preparation, the experience itself, and the integration. If you don't, have that whole complete set, then you're not maximizing the potential.
And we're so in alignment. It's crazy, Danny. So this book that I just wrote and published, well, I didn't just write it. It took me 2 years and 2 different versions of it. Yeah, the first version was very textbook, and I was like, "Ugh, I'm bored rereading it. I'm like, I can't read this. Why? But it was my patterns from schooling, right? And then the second version, I read this book called The Feminist Economy. Very tiny, thin book. It's yellow. And it's full of pictures and questions how we do economy. What is masculine economy with meritocracy, and what is feminine economy with collaboration and community? And so I learned so much from that book, and I'm so grateful because then it gave me permission. She gave me permission as a young lady, woman in Oregon who's an artist and keeps galleries and wrote that book. And it changed my life. And so I wrote this book called The Conscious Physician Method, Conscious Life Practices and Psilocybin. The launch was last week on the 19th. And the conscious life practices are exactly what you were talking about the prep work. It's about mindset and optimization of self, right? Optimize your neurochemistry, optimize your physiology, connect with your spirituality, and do self-discovery. And through that, you elevate your community because you're elevating and expanding yourself. So inevitably, you're going to elevate and expand your community. And then it's the last third of the book that I talk about psilocybin, not before. And I talk about my journey with psychedelics and how I went from this like academician as a hospitalist and then into the realm of mental health and all of that because of my own burnout and all of that. But similar to you, and this is really cool because I also had similar experiences where you didn't really have guides. 10 years ago, there were no guides, right? Even 5 years ago, nobody was talking about this stuff. And so my phone just gets onto my computer too. So I have to figure out how to decouple that.
Yeah.
Because it's a Mac and an iPhone. Parts of it were beautiful and very kind and very holding. And then parts of it were like, holy fuck, what do I do? And it took, one of my journeys took 1.5 years to reintegrate and understand what just happened. And the people around me who were there, they didn't know either, right?
Yeah.
They didn't know how to guide because they didn't expect something like this. There was not as much, this is before Michael Pollan came out with his book talking about challenging experiences. And everybody was like, oh, you had a bad trip. Excuse me. Okay, what is a bad trip? So I stopped talking about it. More silence and more inner work. And that's how I created the Conscious Physician Method. It was really that journey, but creating best practices and a protocol. And you can use this with not just psilocybin, but replace psilocybin with, other psychedelics. The chemistry, pharmacokinetics, all of that is going to be different, but the prep work and the integration and there are a lot of principles that will apply to other medicines as well. And you say what you want to say because I have another point I want you to delve into with a previous thing that you brought up, but yes, let's hear your comment.
I was just going to say to me, it really is interesting how a lot of these ideas are really just like working on integrating mindfulness into your daily practice around substance use, but also around, everything else that you do in your life. And just, speaking as a father whose son loves reading books, it's amazing how many mindfulness books there are for kids now. Whereas, it was something I had never, probably nothing I had heard of the idea of mindfulness until I was in university going to like the spiritual direction church where they provided guided meditations and that kind of stuff where so it's like the fact that now kids can be exposed to mindfulness when they're 1 or 2 years old when in previous generations it wasn't until we were 20, 30, 40 before people started getting introduced to these crucial ideas. And at the root of it, like that's kind of, to me anyways, what psychedelic best practices are about.
Yes, yes. To be conscious, everything that you do, and crucial is the key word here. Crucial life skills that we don't have in schools and should be. Even 15 years ago when my daughter was born, none of this was a thing. Nobody was talking about this. I meditated since I was 12 because we lived in Iran, horrifically traumatic experience under a terrorist Islamic dictatorship, and extreme oppression, and lived in war for the first 8 years of my life. But my parents were so open that they introduced us to this spiritual practice of Eckankar. I don't know if you've heard of it, but in Eckankar, they taught even kids how to meditate and how to soul travel.
Okay.
And that saved our life, right? Because you're in this horrific environment. Imagine if your government was violating you every day. I mean, I'm talking to extremes where people are getting kidnapped, people, because you have a different practice than Islam. So very dangerous when we combine state and government, of course. And so, but learning meditation from there, it was lovely from my parents. But in the American culture, we never had it. In the more Eastern cultures, you have it, right? But I love it. And I started seeing this during the pandemic. It was mid-pandemic that I remember going to get some gas from my car, and at the gas station, the little advertisements that come up, and they started talking about meditation, and I was like, oh, where are we? What is happening? But truly, in challenging times, it is that these essences come out, right? These pearls show themselves.
Yeah, I don't think in Western culture that we've really emphasized the importance of preventative medicine or kind of a proactive approach to health and medicine. And I think that's really where the Eastern cultures flourish so importantly. I mean, even so much of traditional Chinese medicine is more about preventative medicine and prophylactic medicine. So I think that is part of why in Western culture it's taken us so long to integrate meditation into our daily lives, because it's effort, it's work, it's something you have to do every day, but it's a preventative technique. It's not, just this brute force treatment technique. And there's room and importance for both. I will never discount the importance of antibiotics for an infection. There's nothing more powerful. You're not just going to think that infection away. It's also, I think, the most exciting opportunity about within psychedelics is how can we start using these medicines as a prophylactic tool for mental health.
100%. And when you have mental health well-being, the rest of your body follows. If you've moved through your trauma to self-love, then you don't have those blockages that cause pathology. And I saw that every single day in my hospitalized patients. They were the pathologies of the mind. I've never seen that severely than in the hospitalized patient who needs the IV antibiotics for 7 days, who needs the chemotherapy, who needs, right? There's a lot that is behind each disease, and the person's story and history, or the opioid use, or, and you can go on, but there's definitely trauma that has been not examined or too painful to examine. And we don't have a lot of guides who can help you do that, except that in the psychedelic realm, we're growing that. And it's so beautiful to be able to sit with people and help them see themselves and see the trauma from a very different lens, that then it becomes a blessing. Then it becomes, this opened up the door for so many other things that I didn't know existed for me. And in my own self-exploration, yeah, it's fascinating. Which I think what you bring up, but that is very wonderful to chew on, is the prevention and the heroic measures, right? And right now, what we have in the medical practice, and don't quote me on this, it's not like, there's research behind this, or maybe there is and I don't know it. So if somebody does know it, please reach out. But what percentage of the time are we doing preventive medicine? What percentage of the time are we doing this heroic medicine, And I was part of very deep into the heroic medicine medical practice for 10 years. And that was like exciting sometimes. And it was like, the teaching was fun, but then you really step back, you're like, what am I doing? I'm perpetuating a cycle that, and then these patients go out into the community. They don't have primary care doctors, or if they do, they're not all of them are super high quality, or maybe there aren't resources. Maybe they don't have insurance that they're accepted, all of these things. And to me, true practice of medicine is in the community, is with the primary care physicians. That's where it should be. That should be the backbone of medical practice. That's where prevention happens, to getting into such a horrific space in your health and in your life and mental health that you have to be hospitalized. Yes, I honor that significantly. We should really be like 80% should be in the community and 20% the heroic measures, not, and I feel like it's the other way.
Yeah, I would say it's the other way, if not 80-20, maybe 90-10. I mean, it's so rare that preventative techniques are ever emphasized by physicians, at least in my own life and my own experience. But then also from a more institutional perspective and thinking back to the pandemic, there were really simple things that the government could do to try and help on a large scale by making access to vitamin C and vitamin D just to get your immune system nice and healthy affordable. But instead, those vitamins costs went through the roof, but you could go and get a, a, a dose of an experimental vaccine for free. And I don't want to go down like the pro
Totally.
or negative vaccine route because in my heart I just don't know what the truth is. But it was interesting that there was things that the government could do to help maintain a healthy lifestyle, like widespread access to vitamins.
Thank
And we
you.
didn't see that.
No, or education behind, hey, go get sunshine for 20 minutes a day. There's a study that I quote in my book about sun therapy. And there was a pandemic flu of 1918, I want to say, that killed millions, actually. It was no joke. Like 50% mortality. They took these patients outside because the hospitals were so full. The ICU patients ended up going outside, and they had something like half the number of super infections with bacterial infections. So it started as a viral infection. They were super sick. They were admitted. They were in the parking lot or somewhere outdoors, and their rates dropped to getting into the ICU and needing a ventilator went down significantly. And so we saw a disinfection that happened with not only natural sunlight, but also being outdoors with just air movement, outdoor air movement. That by itself could have prevented many people from getting so sick. Like people got into homes who were sick, closed the doors, closed the windows, and they're like super afraid. And their mental health is already kind of teetering. They've had anxiety before. Now they're also having this guilt of contracting this horrific, disease that we made it sound so horrific to masses. At the end of the day, it was a respiratory infection. If you had a good immune system, you took care of yourself. Doing the thing, you decrease your sugar intake, decrease your carbohydrate intake, get out there, mobilize yourself. These very simple things should have been very much
The focus.
upfront. The focus, not some experimental drug.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where, I even got censored as an academician because I was speaking sense. I was like, okay, now everybody's looking back and they're like, oh, the medical system is super shit. And I'm like, yes, it is. And that's why and during the pandemic, 110,000 physicians left the practice of medicine for a reason, because they saw that and they were silenced. And they're like, no, we're not doing the right thing for our patients. And these doctors, like, we got called in so much to go take care of the patients in the hospital. And it was not easy to do with really broken systems. And we could have done so much better. And we knew it. And we're smart people. So we knew we could have done better. And so people got super burnt out, and a lot of people left. And a lot of people, Danny, they went into integrative medicine, functional medicine, and they're now starting their practices. So I think it's a true blessing that all of that happened for the truth to come out, and to people to really check in with themselves and get into the communities and do what's right, to invest into preventive medicine. Yeah.
And I had never really appreciated the momentum of physicians getting burnt out, leaving that traditional system, going into maybe, an alternative medicine system. I had never really appreciated that vector for growing the population of alternative medicine, but that's fantastic.
It's fantastic. And I'm, in all these groups, and I watch this movement happening, and you have a ton more physicians who are becoming life coaches and executive coaches, and that trickles into their medical practice. And beautiful. So we're going to see the change happening in the next few years on mass level. I got to pick your brain about this because you've brought it up twice now about kind of putting profit ahead of everything, the whole pharmaceutical industry getting into the psychedelic realm of maybe not providing the therapeutic side of things. I'm very curious from your perspective, what you think of it and how you think it's going to play out, or just, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack because I think that the reality of psychedelic medicines is that this is a new paradigm of treating people, treating humans. It's no longer this pharmaceutical intervention or pharmacological intervention that you prescribe your patient a pill a day for the rest of your life or for 6 months, but you're going to be on it for the rest of your life because we're never going to check up on you. And I think that there's a lot of effort to try and create new pharmaceutical interventions that fit that model. It'll be interesting to see if any of them are effective. What I struggle with is that it seems like you can probably design trials and carve data in such a way that you can demonstrate that it's efficacious. And so, there's going to be all of these new medicines that will be prescribed and or that will come to market in the next 5 to 10 years, and it'll be questionable how effective they truly are because the psychedelic will be removed from the psychedelic. So I think if we split the current psychedelic realm into kind of two distinct categories, like the second generation psychedelics, the non-psychedelic psychedelics from the classic psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, the commercialization path for what I'll maybe call the traditional psychedelics or the active psychedelics, the psychoactive psychedelics. The commercialization path needs to be really well thought out. And currently, I think that it's going to be very expensive for people because right now the model is two therapists, one patient. I think that the most important thing that anyone can start to research right now is efficacy for group therapy outcomes and start to look at effective ratios of therapists to groups of patients so that you can start just getting treatment efficiency. And I also believe there's going to be some efficacy gains because groups of patients are going to come together. And while if you're currently suffering from PTSD or depression, you might get that isolated sense of being in it alone and no one else understands what you're going through, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just the reality of the human condition. Like, I can never understand what it's like to be you and vice versa. But I think in a group psychedelic setting, you'll start to dissolve some of those boundaries. And I think that those patients will start to connect to each other and they'll come away with that belief that they're not alone. And I think that community could really help improve outcomes, but it'll also improve efficiency and it'll help drive down treatment costs for those patients. And then my hope is that we can start right now. I think it's like this whole push to have treatment centers. And I really struggle with the idea that there's going to be the equivalent of a cancer center of America where you go to get your chemotherapy drug administered because it's such a toxic therapy. Like that intervention requires physicians present. I don't like the idea that psychedelics need to be administered in that way, that you need to go to an inpatient setting to go and have a 6 hour experience. So my hope is that it moves away from those like a centralized model of treatment to something that's a little bit more decentralized where maybe it's at community centers, maybe it's just at the patient's home, whatever that model looks like, I think is going to become really important because that's also additional overhead that just doesn't need to be borne by the patient, I guess, and by the system. And then the third is really looking at who provides the therapy. Right now, I think that you need to have a physician or a psychiatrist present. I think that that's kind of guidance that the FDA provided to MAPS or to Lycos. And that's a very expensive hourly person if you're present for a 6 or an 8 hour session. So how you can start to maybe have, a person like that oversee a group of practitioners who are trained more akin to like a birth doula or a midwife or a death doula for end of life care. How can you start to maybe have like a psychedelic doula that's really designed to go and help oversee those treatment outcomes? And there's obviously like ethical implications and a big question of, well, are they licensed? Do they report to a college? Like if there's some sort of an ethical infraction, like who ultimately is responsible and how can patients feel comfortable being treated? And there's lots of those questions, but I think that was a really long-winded way of saying the commercialization path for psychedelics is a really complicated and uncertain question. It's just, I have no idea what it's going to look like, but I hope that we can start to prove that these things are safe and start essentially like delegating authority or delegating chain of command so that you can just like reduce the level of oversight that's necessary to start seeing these medicines roll out.
Yes, you speak to my soul. Yes, like the centralization of anything, what we're seeing is just not everything, but
Yeah.
especially something like this. It's such a personalized experience. And I mean, look, people are doing it at home with great success. And why can't we do it in that way? And I know companies that do it that way, where they send you medicine, they send you guidance, but you come up with a therapist or a physician or a coach or whatever that they can do it in their own environment that's safe instead of, and safe and comfortable and comforting and nourishing instead of into a medical practice that is so sterile and the energy is not good. And I kind of chuckled when you said, the physician being the guide.
Yeah.
How many physicians do you know who have facilitated any psychedelic sessions for themselves that they've gone through? I can count on one hand who they've been on their own psychedelic journey, number one. And then not even, I'm the only one that I know
I say, I think I'm
who,
looking at one, but other than that, I
That's it. Like, I don't know. I don't know. You know what? I do know another doctor in New Mexico who sits for people and has, done it for many years. But there aren't that many who continue to provide these services and they can teach others. And there's such apprenticeship that comes with this. And I provide that too in my certification course because I was talking to Larry Norris. I told you about Larry, the co-founder of Decrim Nature, a huge hand in helping move things forward. By the way, it's getting decriminalized and legalized in New Mexico. It was just in the bill and it got passed.
Criminalized nature or
So,
psilocybin only right now? Or are
you
other
know, I think
plants?
psilocybin, I will send you the article and the main bill that, my people sent me. Former representative sent me. And so it's very exciting. But then again, knowing who the experts are in your community, I think that's a key to
Yeah.
all of this, and maybe creating something that they suggest, right? Again, having that community presence and gaining that information and putting that information into maybe policy or having those people at the table when you are creating any regulation about commercialization in your own state or in your own city. I think that's key to this because, I'm sure where you are, there's a bunch of experts who could help teach others in the community first to go through their own self-discovery, which is what I do, and then go into certification, how you hold space for others.
It's interesting because there's experts and then there's also charlatans. And I think that that's the risk within this community, right? Is that there's a lot of false experts who sing their own praises
Hmm.
and believe that they should have the voice or that their voice is the one that should be listened to. And it's interesting because I think that there's always going to be abuses of power. I mean, there's certainly dentists who have been accused of horrendous things after putting their patients under general anesthetic. There's massage therapists who cross boundaries. There's no matter where you look in the practice of medicine or healing, there's always people that abuse power. And I'm not sure if psychedelics need to have like a special consideration in this realm because of the suggestibility or because of the vulnerable mental states that you end up going under the influence of psychedelic drugs, or if it is just kind of akin to all of these other practices. Because if you trust your massage therapist and then they abuse you, or if you trust your doctor and then they abuse you, like it doesn't, I don't know if it actually matters if you were under the influence of psychedelics or not. It's horrible either way, right? So I think that's the
It's
biggest thing that I
horrible. Yeah, no, no, no. You're absolutely, and that's a huge part of finding the right guide.
yeah.
And it's also very interesting, right? I guide people on gu finding guides, and I also guide, right? And so I sit with them and I say, "Hey, watch their body language. How do you harmonize with them? What is feeling good? What is not feeling good? Is it a whole body? Yes. Is it not? But even finding a guide who would do good by you personally have to be in a good state. You personally have to be in a state of, hey, I'm in harmony with myself and I know what I want and I know what I'm looking for and what feels good. Majority of us are so dissociated from that when you and then your choices, every choice you make, every decision you make is based off of your inner experience. So I've had people who've chosen the guide who it can be abusive. And I'm like, whoa, but it's because of that inner experience that they're going through right now. And they're like, oh, I have to choose something in my subconscious that I was traumatized by, and that feels familiar.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So it's
Interesting.
a very delicate. It's very delicate. But I also suggest people go sit with them. Go watch if there's a group ceremony happening. And that's something that Rick Strassman, he recently wrote the psychedelic handbook. He was on our podcast and he shared that. He was like, if you are looking, do your research. Do your research. Talk to the people that have gone through a session with this person or this group. Talk to several people, have them, and if there's any resistance in them doing that, then they're maybe hiding something that they don't want you to find out. So I think the key to all of this is that we are responsible for our own well-being, and for our own happiness and for our own health and mental well-being. And that in the same realm, we are also responsible to find the right person for us if we're going to be in this very open, very vulnerable state, because you can get harmed. That's 100%. You can get harmed, you can get more traumatized than you were when you went into it. I had a patient, female physician, who had been sexually abused and was suicidal for 10 years every single day. She went through 8 sessions of ketamine treatment and came out more suicidal. And then we did our program together. And, she wrote to me, and we're in contact still after like a year. She was like, halfway through your program, which is about a month, she's like, I was no longer suicidal for the first time in 10 years. And we hadn't even, talked about medicine. And it was just life practices and like looking at ourselves from these different ways and examining our trauma and bringing love to it without anything. We're just you. So I think it's really important that, and we know that psychedelics are not the answer. They're not the whole answer. They'll help you find certain answers, but you got to do the work. You got to do the work. And I think what you bring up in the top-down approach, I think we are now in a realm of we need to take responsibility for ourselves, because can you trust? I don't know. Can you? Can we?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I wonder how you regulate from a bottom-up approach. Does it make it harder for the regulator? Or is the regulation kind of building a top-down oversight model?
And what I saw as a physician leader at UNM was it's both ways. The best way is both ways. The best way is to be multidimensional about it, to not only do the top down, but when you're doing the top down, plug in to the ground. So what are people saying? The frontliners, what are the physicians saying about this new policy you just implemented? Experiment with it, give it a month or 2 or whatever, and hear back from the patient, from the physician specifically, because they're easier to continue contact, from the nursing staff, and have communication both ways and respond to it as a leader. And if you don't respond to it, that's when things go bad. You have to respond. If something's not working that you implemented, change it, take it out, change it, and make it work, and keep doing that, or change the algorithm in a way that finally it does work if it's something that is needed to be implemented. But don't just do this blind thing. And I'm going to share with you the success behind it, because I think it's important. And I'm not saying I'm this and that. No, I think I'm a good collaborator. I think I like people, and it's fun for me to solve problems. And so they put me in a position where I was overseeing over 2,700 physicians, and I was doing documentation, coding, billing for the entire health system. And I had to educate all the 2,700 physicians. And so I had to really sit back and be like, what is the structure? And it's such in disarray, but really think about how to do things and how to structure things. But that's one of the things we implemented, bringing everyone to the table and having communication, discussion, conversation, and things would come, and then prioritize. Okay, this really matters, this doesn't, let's focus on this in the next meeting, and really moving things along. And really focusing on the vision of ease of practice. How do I make it easier for the physician to practice at the front line to give the best patient care possible, not from a metric standpoint, but from a humanistic, I'm with my patient and I can actually talk to them standpoint. And so I did that for 5 years, and the institution profited $54 million a year over year, from this collaborative approach. It had never happened before. We had the largest, most successful educational campaign for the health system that they had ever embarked on and implemented. So was it challenging? Sure, but it's doable. It's doable if there's that collaboration.
Well, it sounds like you're well positioned as an educator to make important strides in the psychedelic space, because I think at the root of it, that's really when it comes to the preparation for patients, it comes down to education. When it comes to policy change, it's all about using the data from the research to educate both the public, but then also policymakers and caretakers. I'm a firm believer that it's going to take realistically 10 years to have all the research that's necessary to educate people and start to shift their minds and change people's minds to then ultimately have policy changes implemented where psychedelic access is more widespread. And I think 10 years is a reasonable and, achievable time frame. I'm hoping that within that time, decriminalization movements happen because I don't think anyone should be going to jail for these drugs. But I also think that it could be reckless to just try and roll things out far and wide without taking those proper steps.
100%. And I think, also really influencing the people who have influence can quicken things.
Absolutely.
And educating them. And that's one of the other methods I used in this very large health system. And it works really, really well. And so it's just interesting. But yeah, but all of it starts from conversations like this. So tell us what your company does.
Yeah, so we're essentially like, within the traditional pharmaceutical landscape, you've got sponsors that are actively, developing drugs or researching drugs to try and bring them to market. Typically, those sponsors contract out various research activities or manufacturing activities because it's challenging to have everything kind of in-house. So Scigen operates as a contract development and manufacturing organization within that pharmaceutical landscape. So essentially, a customer will come to Scigen. They'll say, I would like to take this molecule through the FDA pathway. I'd like to study it for this indication. We need someone to manufacture this much material so we can do toxicology studies. We need to manufacture this much material so we can do some product development. And we are essentially the manufacturing partner that both develops and optimizes synthetic methods, and then scales that up to something that's larger scale and ultimately with the goal of being commercial.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Man, and I'm sure it's challenging too, huh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest challenge for us, I mean, there's regulatory hurdles, but, working with the right customers and partners, I think that those hurdles are fairly easily overcome. I think the largest hurdle that we face is really just it's a small market, where we're uniquely positioned to provide services within the psychedelic space, but there's not a lot of money that flows into the psychedelic space right now. So there's not a lot of different customers that we can kind of market our services to. I think it was something like 2021, there were $2 billion invested within the psychedelic realm. And last year, I think it was only $200 million was invested. So the amount of dollars, and I think
Mm.
that's quite common across like venture capital, high growth space. But the investment dollars just crashed to basically zero. So growth over the last 2 years, 3 years has been very slow. And just now we're starting to see more money flow into the space. So more customers are starting to come and ask for, proposals to manufacture medicines for them. So we're starting to see it come up. But the name of the game for us has really been cost control, making sure that we're able to find the right manufacturing partners, which, we're fortunate that we did kind of halfway through the year last year. And now it's really just about focusing on execution and growth. And my own mind is trying to think of like, okay, well, we're doing this thing now, but my own interest is how do we start to get psychedelics into healthy normals? Like how do we move past treating sick people? And so that's something I've been thinking about a lot on the side. But
Mhm.
that's not what Scigen does.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really cool. But it's important, right? Because even a lot of companies start as something and then they partner with others, and in that collaborative effort, they both benefit, and there's a synergistic thing that comes about it. So maybe partnering up with people who are maybe in that realm of healthy normals. Who knows? Maybe that there's something there.
Yeah, I would love to. I think there's two research groups right now that have been able to treat healthy people as part of their research. One was Anne Wagner in Toronto in Canada. She was approved to do a PTSD study in couples where one of the two has PTSD and the other is their partner, but both actually get MDMA. And I believe that Manish Agrawal of Sunstone Therapeutics received the same type of approval, but in cancer patients with end of life distress, treating both the person who's got terminal cancer and then their partner. And
I
so, yeah, that's
love
really
it.
cool research that I'd like to see the outcome of. But I'm thinking something more in line of like group therapy. So take one patient who's dying, treat their whole family, and however they define family, maybe it's close friends, really whoever's like most meaningful to that person, to try and
Mm,
see if you can improve the quality of life for the last whatever terminal point that that patient has, but do a longitudinal study and see if you can prove that long term you're improving outcomes in the, essentially it's like I kind of think of it as psychedelics for life after death, because so many of us
amazing.
live after our loved ones die. So to me, that's it's kind of life after death.
Yeah, and I can imagine that death is a psychedelic journey as well. I mean, we know that at dying, DMT gets produced at significant amounts in the body, And so it's interesting. People who do have a lot of anxiety at the end of life, and been doing hospice medicine for a year and a half now, are the people who really have not looked at their trauma, or they haven't had any psychedelic experiences. And so it really helps the transition significantly. And, we need to talk because, as I was telling you, we're going to open up our own hospice in New Mexico because there's such a lack of good care for the end
Yeah.
of life and helping everyone die with dignity. And it's a very poor state, poverty riddled, underserved. And we're going to have challenges, facing all of that. But we have a really good team. And that's been my thing, community healing through the dying patient. So I'd love to talk to you and maybe we sit and brainstorm about what comes up and the hows, and it's always more fun when you have other people involved.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
Right now I'm focused
Yeah.
on birth, but
Yes.
in a month or so
Yes.
after that all settles, then I'd love to pick up the conversation about
I
dying.
love it. We'll check in a month, Danny, and let's see where you're at with the sleep deprivation.
Yeah, no doubt.
Maybe in 3 to 6 months, and I'm happy about that. That's gonna be fine. That's when we're gonna probably get our licensing and take our first patients on. Certainly, plant medicine is gonna be a part of our practice. I'd love to continue this conversation, especially because you have had such deep connection. You have such deep connection with this space. There's an experience, first-hand experience is everything. And that's what psychedelics do, right? They also help us experience so that with that experience, there's not knowing, but knowing with your whole being. And so that's what I feel in you. And of course,
Yeah,
it'd be really cool. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what Aldous Huxley said, the difference between knowing and understanding. It's like you can know something, but then once you actually take it inside of you, like that's when you truly understand it.
I love that. I love that. He's got some good stuff to say.
Beautiful mind.
Yeah. So tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, so the only social media I have is LinkedIn, so feel free. You can search me on LinkedIn, Danny Motyka. Psygen is at the company. We've got a website, psygen.ca, Psygen. But yeah, happy to connect. I love connecting with people.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today with
Yeah,
us. What a great conversation. We talked about so much.
yeah,
And
no,
I'll let you know
absolutely.
when it
Thank you.
gets. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me.